Despite your best intentions, do you ever find yourself believing the lie that you're somehow not good enough or not smart enough, not this, that, or the other enough, that you somehow don't deserve the success that you desire or the success you've achieved thus far? Well, in this video, if that's the case for you, we're going to talk about why that might be. Despite all of the mindset work you've done, despite the coaching and the therapy, we're going to get a sense of the biological basis of these limiting beliefs. And I'm going to walk you through how you can start to put the embodied unconscious to work for you rather than against you. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and put these ideas in context. These limiting beliefs that you encounter, these things that keep you in these self-defeating patterns, they never arise out of the blue, do they? They always seem to arise in response to or in the context of something that you want for yourself. Maybe you want to go out and start speaking on stages. Maybe you want to raise your prices. Maybe you want to actually just kick back and enjoy some of the wins you've achieved already. And there's always a but, isn't there? I want to go out and speak on stages, but I don't know that I actually have anything really important to say. Or I want to raise my rates, but is anyone going to be able to afford it? Are people going to think I'm taking advantage of them? I want to kick back and actually celebrate my wins thus far, but do I deserve it? But have I done enough? But am I going to get lazy if I actually enjoy my success? So all of these self-limiting ideas, they kick up in the context of desire. And this is a really important thing for us to actually get at the base of this in our biological experience. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, the early affect researcher Silvan Tomkins described the construct of shame as essentially this. It's the experience of thwarted desire. It's I want something, but dot, dot, dot. And he said that this fundamentally encapsulates the experience of shame. Now, this gets us into some pretty sticky territory because shame is one of the things that can really just derail us if we're unaware of its operation in our experience. There is, however, a very clear way to get a sense of how this takes root in your experience, the ways it actually arises for you. And you can get a sense of this if you actually check in with your embodied experience as you consider each side of this equation. I want, but dot, dot, dot. So take a few moments for yourself, even as you're watching this now, and consider all of these things that you desire for yourself. Whatever the case is, I gave a few examples before: to speak more publicly, to raise your rates, to celebrate your success. You, however, I'm sure, have a number of things that you know you want for yourself. What are those things? And as you consider those things, notice how your body responds. If you can imagine actually fulfilling those values, achieving those goals, attaining those possessions, I'm sure you have a sense that your body gets lighter somehow. And if you dwell in that space for a few moments, you're buoyed upwards. Now, consider the contrasting experience. All the buts, all the reasons why that desire is thwarted. Who's going to pay you that much? Oh, you don't have anything to say. Oh, you're not smart enough, good enough, this, that, or the other enough. If you dwell in that space for a few moments, notice how your body changes. I'm willing to bet that a couple of things happen. One of these is that you probably experience this contraction within yourself. It's like you just shrink, you shrivel up some, you become encased in tension. The other thing that you might notice is that you collapse internally. You seem to get heavier, more sluggish. This is such a clear indicator that shame is at work in your experience. Now, we can zoom out and see how dangerous and how actually pervasive and pernicious this is when we consider the default carriage of many people as they make their way through life, the slumped posture, the forward head, the internal collapse. we can see how ubiquitous this parasitic shame is throughout our society. Now, why that's the case? Well, I'll let your mind run wild. When people are in this state of shame, how much easy is it? How much more easy is it, I should say, to manipulate their behavior, to exert control over a person? When, however, they're upright within themselves, how much more able are they to stand up, to take a stand? Yeah, so we can get a sense of some of the background psychological situation, but I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole. I want to focus for a few moments here on this idea of some of these limiting beliefs and where we find the biological basis for these. So I mentioned that this is characteristic of the situation that Silvan Tomkins calls shame. I want this, but that. Now, whence this shame? Where does this come from? Well, this actually has very early developmental roots for us. You'll know, of course, that we as human beings, we go through this long apprenticeship to family, to culture. We're in this prolonged state of dependence on our caretakers to provide for us. Our survival literally depends on sustaining these relationships with our caregivers. Now, I don't know if you spend a whole lot of time around toddlers, humans in their infancy, this sort of thing. But at a certain age, once they develop independent means of moving themselves through space, you basically can't stop them from going out and exploring. Yeah. And of course, we have this innate desire to explore, this curiosity about the world around us. And this poses considerable challenges for early attachment relationships. Now, what happens, and this is very well documented, is that we go from, in early infancy, this overwhelmingly positive relationship, all sorts of oohs and ahs, and oh, what a precious little one this is, to a no, a prohibition, just about every 9 minutes. Now, that is a strange psychological shift from this state of total dependency to this developing autonomy of the infant. And of course, many parents, most parents, we might say, they have their child's best interests in mind. So this prohibition, this no that gets introduced into the child's psychic space, this is for the child's good, right? And in some cases, yeah, it's obviously for the child's good. If the little one is crawling around and they're about to go, poke the fire or stick their finger in the electrical outlet, the parent, the caregiver, goes, no. And what happens in that case? So the parent is having this negative emotional experience. The child, who up till that point had likely had this overwhelmingly positive experience of attunement with the caregiver, they then find that this person on whom their survival depends is not pleased. And this is an existential threat for the infant. After all, take it up logically. If the caregiver isn't pleased for very long, the infant's survival is at stake. And we know this. We have some innate understanding of this in our early development. And so what happens is the infant experiences, little toddler, early human, little critter running around, they experience a profound psychological and physiological collapse. This is actually an uptick in parasympathetic activity, and the nervous system and the whole psychological apparatus basically goes, oof. There's a collapse of the infant's mind and body, their subjectivity. It's like the ground opens up and they're swallowed up by the ground. And isn't that just the case with shame? When we experience humiliation, don't we wish the ground would kind of open up underneath of us? Don't we wish we could just like crawl into a little hole and die? That's kind of what happens when we experience this thwarting of desire, this shaming experience in our early development. Now, again, let's not get too carried away. This can be for the infant's good at some later date, right? We need to keep the child alive and socialized in order for them to have a decent go of it in society. However, we have to wonder, this experience of shaming, this parental no that occurs, this is only adaptive for the infant to the extent that the world they're living in now is the world in which that kind of prohibition is useful. To the extent that these worlds are different, it's actually going to be maladaptive. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, it's likely always going to be the case that it's a problem for you to stick your finger in the light socket. Yeah, that's not going to be so good for you, generally speaking. Doesn't matter if you do that when you're an infant, doesn't matter if you do that when you're an adult. That's one of those universals. Or if you are going on a long walk over a short cliff, it's a terrible way to phrase it, but I think you know what I mean. If you're walking over a brink, that's going to be as bad for you now as it is in your infancy. So these are the invariant features wherein that parental no becomes adaptive. It is good to have that desire thwarted because it helps you survive and thrive long term. Now, is it so good? Is it so adaptive if you encounter these no's with respect to activities that actually could be adaptive for you? To speak up for yourself and to take up space in the world, let's say. Depending on your early developmental environment, that may have been a threat to you. You may have been told children should be seen and not heard. You may have been hit. You may have had someone tell you, well, someone's got to cut you down to size and show you what's good for you. All of these things may have occurred in your early developmental environment, which would then lead you to believe that that actually is a threat to your existence. After all, if taking up space and speaking up compromised the relationships on which your survival depended there and then, well, yeah, you're going to learn to curtail those behaviors. But the question is, does your survival literally depend in the here and now, as it did there and then, on the sustaining or the maintenance of those relationships in those particular configurations? It likely doesn't, right? So you can see how something that was adaptive for you in one context can be maladaptive for you in another context. It has quite a bit to do with the nature of the world here and now and the nature of the world there and then. Let's not even get too deep in the fact that the world in which your parents learned a lot of the no's and the prohibitory structures, that's a totally different world than the world we live in now. So many of these prohibitive ideas, so many of these limiting beliefs, they have historical roots in a socio-historical context that is utterly different from the one in which we now dwell. I'll give you a favorite line of mine from Deleuze and Guattari in their book, Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. I think this is just such a brilliant way to put it. They write, it appears that in the common social field, the first thing that the son represses, or has to repress, or tries to repress, is the unconscious of the father and the mother. The failure of that repression is the basis of neuroses. Well, there's an opinion, there's a way to take this up. If we fail to repress the parental unconscious when it is no longer adaptive for us, then we find ourselves in the neurotic situation where we confuse here and now and there and then, and we continue doing these things that no longer serve us, that may have been useful in one context and are actually detrimental in this context. And this, as I suggested earlier, this actually has a biological basis in the experience of the affect of shame, wherein we have this profound collapse within ourselves. Shame has a shape. Shame has an embodiment and an enactment. It is a biological situation, not merely psychological. And so what that means is you can go and think all the better thoughts you like, But if your body is still embodying and enacting the shape of shame, you are caught in a neurotic construct. Now, what does this have to do with these limiting beliefs? Well, there's a way of thinking in this kind of shape. When you're collapsed within yourself, you are literally perceiving the world differently because the means whereby you perceive the world is different. That is to say, that examining the world from this state and examining the world from this state are very different. When we change the means by which we perceive, the entirety of our lived experience changes. New behaviors may actually become available to us. We may perceive opportunities where before we only perceived obstacles. And so this, I want to suggest, is one of the ways that you can begin to work with limiting beliefs by addressing the biological basis of these self-defeating narratives. Here's how we can begin to put this into practice. Consider again the things that you want and haven't got, the values you want to fulfill, the goals you want to achieve, the possessions you want to attain. Consider all of these wants of yours, these desires of yours. And again, notice for a few moments how your body responds. When you consider your desire, your body will respond in a particular way. And perhaps more importantly for us at this point, when you consider all of the buts, all of the constraints, all of the ways in which that desire gets thwarted, notice what happens then. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm such a piece of shit. God, I'm terrible. No one's going to take me seriously. People are going to hate me. I don't have anything good to say. Now, if you dwell in that space for a few moments, here's how you can begin to find yourself find yourself out of the situation. So your body is in this particular shape. You've got this experience of collapse within yourself. I would imagine there's tension that comes in. There's a sluggish, heavy quality to your experience. Now, in this state, shift your attention downward to where you notice the parts of your body that are most clearly connected to a supporting surface beneath you. And that could be the chair, that could be the floor, whatever the case is. Notice where within your body you most clearly register contact with support. And if you keep your attention there for a few moments, what happens through the rest of your body when you focus the spotlight of your attention on the availability of support? Don't you just seem to grow a little taller within yourself? Doesn't your breathing come a little more easily? Don't you find that some of that tension begins to dissipate? When you avail yourself deliberately of the support beneath you, it actually begins to change something in the way that you carry yourself in the world. Now, here's the real trick. If you can sustain your awareness of that support, if you can maintain this quality of organization that you experience within your body now, can you then conjure up some of those ideas, some of those limiting beliefs, some of the buts that occurred to you before? But this, but that. And if you can call in those thoughts from this base of support, is there something different now in the way that you experience those thoughts, or in the way that you experience yourself in relation to them? And you may find that they don't quite have the same grip on you as they did. You may actually find from such a base of solidity here, such a robust foundation of support, that actually those ideas, they're kind of laughable, maybe. Now, this doesn't solve all problems, right? But this does provide you with a very simple, in-the-moment means of shifting your relationship with the thoughts that occur to you, that maybe have nothing whatsoever to do with your capabilities in the world. They may actually just be inherited, outdated ideas from some other context. But when you can actually root yourself into a base of support in the present moment, you begin to situate yourself in a more accurate model of reality. You begin to take root in the here and now. And on a physiological basis, you establish grounds for a difference in that historical context. What may have applied there and then may actually not be so useful here and now. When you begin to orient yourself from this base of support in the present moment, you remind yourself that here and now is not there and then. And the ideas that may have been of some use there and then may not be necessary here and now. Of course, from this base of support, you could go on thinking those thoughts if you like. I mean, if that's useful for you, yeah, continue telling yourself you're not smart enough, good enough, this, that, or the other enough. Maybe that's helpful. At least now, from a base of support, you have a choice in the matter. And this, I'll say, the best part about this is that this shift of your attention downward, this is a skill, which means you can practice it and you can get better at it. And with enough practice, enough time and attention and energy invested in the development and the deployment of this skill across time, it can become second nature to the point where you no longer question yourself or criticize yourself or engage in this internal conflict quite as much as you did before. So if you noticed some change in your experience, I want to congratulate you because you've taken the first step toward actually establishing a very different relationship with yourself. And not just with yourself now, but with yourself as you could be at some later date and time. So I would love to hear what you make of this. Feel free to drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, we'll call this a wrap for the day.